And we're back again. Sorry about that. Welcome back to Fraggoth Reads. I'm Fraggoth. I read. Today we'll be reading more of The Rise of Endymion by Dan Simmons. Previously on. Let me grab my copy of the book. What happened last time? I don't know. Mostly, our boy Raul has been reunited. Let's turn off stream starting soon. There we go. Has been reunited with Aenea, who has aged 5 years in his absence and been a lot of places, met a lot of people, and built a lot of architecture. There are, however, 2 years of that 5 year period that she refuses to talk about. Some sort of tragedy, it would seem. She gets very, she had tears in her eyes when she was talking about it. So one wonders what that's all about. All right, how long is this chapter here? It's pretty long. It's still going. Back. We'll see if we can get through that. If we can't, we'll stop early. My throat is pretty fried, so character voices are going to be tough. But we're going to do what we can do. Mostly, we've got a crash course in Tian Shan life that we had last week. That was kind of the biggie. Other than the reuniting of Raul and Aenea. All right. Sorry again for the late start. I got distracted by other issues. Alrighty, let's get rolling though with more of Rise of Endymion by Dan Simmons. 17. The evening Abetic and I bring the news of the Pax's arrival. Aenea leaves her discussion group, comes to where we are standing at the door, and listens intently. Chim Din says that the Dalai Lama has allowed them to occupy the old Gampa at Otter Lake, I say, in the shadow of the shivling. Aenea says nothing. They won't be allowed to use their flying machines, I say, but they're free to walk anywhere in the province. Anywhere. Aenea nods. I want to grab her and shake her. That means they'll hear about you soon, kiddo, I say sharply. There'll be missionaries here within weeks, maybe days, spying around and sending word back to the Pax Enclave. I let out a breath. Shit, we'll be lucky if it's just missionaries and not troopers. Aenea is silent another minute. Then she says, We're already lucky that it's not the Commission for Justice and Peace. What's that? I say. She had mentioned them before. She shakes her head. Nothing that's immediately relevant, Raul. They must have some business here other than stamping out unorthodoxy. During my first days here, Aenea had told me about the fighting going on in and around Pax space, a Palestinian revolt on Mars that had resulted in the Pax evacuating the planet and nuking it from orbit, free trader rebellions in the Lambert Ring territories and on Mare Infinitus, continued fighting on Ixion and dozens of other worlds. Renaissance Vector, with its huge Pax fleet bases and countless bars and bordellos, had been a hornet's nest of rumors and inside intelligence. And because most of the ships of the line in Pax fleet were now the Gideon Drive Archangels, the news was usually only a few days old. One of the most intriguing rumors that Aenea had heard before coming to Tien Shan was that at least one of those Archangel-class ships had gone rogue, escaped to outer space, and was now flashing into Pax space to attack convoys of Pax Mercantilis ships, disabling rather than destroying the crewed freighters, and to disrupt Pax fleet task forces preparing to attack ousters out beyond the Great Wall. There had been a rumor during Aenea's and A. Betic's last weeks on Renaissance Vector that the fleet bases there were in danger. Other rumors suggested that large elements of the fleet were now being kept in Pacem system to defend the Vatican. Whatever else was true about the tales of the rogue ship Raphael, it was uncontestable that His Holiness's crusade against the ousters had been set back years by the hit-and-run attacks. But none of that seems important now as I stand waiting for Aenea's response to this news of the Pax's arrival on Tien Shan. What do we do now, I wonder? Farcast to her next world? Instead of discussing flight, Aenea says, "The Dalai Lama will have a formal ceremony to welcome the Pax officials." So? I say after a moment. So we have to make sure that we get an invitation, she says. I doubt if my jaw is literally hanging slack, but it feels as if it is. Aenea touches my shoulder. "I'll take care of it," she says. "I'll talk to Charles Chi Kiap Kempo and Kempo Nga Wang Tashi and make sure that they include us in any party invited to the ceremony." I am literally speechless as she goes back to her discussion group and the silent throng, their faces expectant and placid in the soft lantern light. I read these words on microvellum, remember writing them in my last days in the Schrödinger cat box in orbit around Armagast, remember writing them in the haste of certainty that the laws of probability and quantum mechanics would soon be releasing cyanide into my closed-cycle universe, and I marvel at the present tense of the narrative. Then I remember the reason for this choice. When I was sentenced to death in the Schrödinger box, egg-shaped actually, let's try that again. When I was sentenced to death in the Schrödinger box, egg-shaped actually, I was allowed to bring very few of my own things into terminal exile. My clothes were my own. On a whim, they had given me a small rug for the floor of my Schrödinger cell. It was an ancient rug, a bit less than 2 meters long and a meter wide, frayed, with a small cut missing at one end. It was a replica of the consul's hawking mat. I had lost the real mat on Mare Infinitus many years before, and the details of how it came back to me still lie ahead in my tale. I had given the actual hawking mat to A. Betic, but it must have amused my torturers to furnish my final cell with this useless copy of a flying carpet. So they had allowed me my clothes, the fake hawking mat, and the palm-sized disk-key journal I had taken from the ship on Tien Shan. The comm unit element of the journal had been disabled. Not that it would broadcast through the energy shell of the Schrödinger box, or that there was anyone for me to call, but the journal memory, after their careful study of it during my Inquisition trial, had been left intact. It was on Tien Shan that I had begun making notes and daily journal entries. It was these notes I had brought up onto the scriber screen in the Schrödinger cat box, reviewing them before writing this most personal of sections, and it was the immediacy in the notes, I believe, that led me to use the present tense narrative. All of my memories of Aenea are vivid, but some of the memories brought back by these hurried entries at the end of a long day of work or adventure on Tien Shan were so vital as to make me weep with renewed loss. I relived those moments as I wrote those words. And some of her discussion group were recorded verbatim on the disk-key journal. I played those during my last days just to hear Aenea's soft voice once again. "Tell us about the Technocore," one of the monks requests during the discussion about... "Tell us about the Technocore," one of the monks requests during the discussion hour this night of the Pax's arrival. "Please, tell us about the core." Aenea hesitates only an instant, bowing her head slightly as if ordering her thoughts. Once upon a time, she begins. She always begins her long explanations this way. Once upon a time, says Aenea, more than 1,000 standard years ago, before the Hedgera, before the big mistake of '08, the only autonomous intelligences we humans knew of were us humans. We thought that if humankind ever devised another intelligence, that it would be the result of a huge project, a great mass of silicon and ancient amplification, switching and detection devices called transistors and chips and circuit boards, a machine with lots of networking circuits, in other words, aping, if you will pardon the expression, the human brain in form and function. Of course, AIs did not evolve that way. They sort of slipped into existence when we humans were looking the other way. You have to imagine now an old Earth before humankind had off-world colonies. No Hawking drive, no interplanetary flight to speak of. All of our eggs were literally in one carton, and that carton was the lovely blue and white water world of old Earth. By the end of the 20th century Christian era, this little world had a crude datasphere. Basic planetary communications had evolved into a decentralized swarm system of old silicon-based computers, demanding no organization or hierarchy, demanding nothing beyond a common communications protocol. Creation of a distributed memory hive mind was then inevitable. The earliest lineal ancestors to today's core personalities were not projects to create artificial intelligence, but incidental efforts to simulate artificial life. In the 1940s, the great-grandfather of the Technocore, a mathematician named John van Neumann, had done all the proofs of artificial self-replication. As soon as the early silicon-based computers became small enough for individuals to play with, curious amateurs began practicing synthetic biology within the confines of these machines' CPU cycles. Hyper-life, self-reproducing, information storing, interacting, metabolizing, evolving, came into existence in the 1960s. It escaped the tide pools of the individual machines in the last decade of that century, moving into the embryonic planetary datasphere that they called the Internet, or the Web. The earliest AIs were dumb as dirt. Or perhaps the better metaphor would be that they were as dumb as early cellular life that was in the dirt. Some of the earliest hypercritters floating in the warm medium of the datasphere, which was also evolving, were 80-byte organisms inserted into a block of RAM in a virtual computer, a computer simulated by a computer. One of the first humans to release such creatures into the datasphere ocean was named Tom Ray, and he was not an AI expert or computer programmer or cyberpuke, which they called hackers then, but was a biologist, an insect collector, botanist, and bird watcher, and someone who had spent years collecting ants in the jungle for a pre-Hedgera scientist named E.O. Wilson. Watching ants, Tom Ray became interested in evolution and wondered if he could not just simulate evolution in one of the early computers, but create real evolution there. None of the cyberpukes he spoke with were interested in the idea, so he taught himself computer programming. The cyberpukes said that evolving and mutating code sequences happened all the time in computers. They were called bugs and screwed-up programs. They said that if his code sequences evolved into something else, they would almost certainly be non-functional, non-viable, as most mutations are, and would just foul up the operation of the computer software. So Tom Ray would created a virtual computer, a simulated computer within his real computer, for his code-sequenced creations. And then he created an actual 80-byte code sequence creature that could reproduce, die, and evolve in his computer within a computer. The 80-byte copied itself into more 80 bytes. These 80-byte proto-AI cell things would have quickly filled their virtual universe, like pond scum on top of pond scum in an Elysium early Earth. But Tom Ray gave each 80-byte a date tag, gave them age, in other words, and programmed in an executioner that he called the Reaper. The Reaper wandered through this virtual universe and harvested old 80-byte critters and non-viable mutants. But evolution, as it is wont to do, tried to outsmart the Reaper. A mutant 79-byte creature proved not only to be viable, but soon outbred and outpaced the 80 bytes. The Hyperlifes, ancestors to our core AIs, were just born, but already they were optimizing their genomes. Soon a 45-byte organism had evolved and all but eliminated the earlier artificial life forms. As their creator, Tom Ray found this odd. 45 bytes did not include enough code to allow for reproduction. More than that, the 45s were dying off as the 80s disappeared. He did an autopsy on one of the 45 creatures. It turned out that all of the 45 bytes were parasites. They needed reproductive code from the 80s to copy themselves. The 79s, it turned out, were immune to the 45 parasite. But as the 80s and 45s moved toward extinction in their coevolutionary downward spiral, a mutant of the 45s appeared. It was a 51-byte parasite, and it could prey on the vital 79s. And so it went. I mention all this because it is important to understand that from the very first appearance of human-created artificial life and intelligence, such life was parasitic. It was more than parasitic. It was hyperparasitic. Each new mutation led to parasites which could prey on earlier parasites. Within a few billion generations, that is to say, CPU cycles, this artificial life had become hyperparasitic. Within standard months of his creation of hyperlife, Tom Ray discovered 22-byte creatures flourishing in his virtual medium. Creatures so algorithmically efficient that when challenged by Tom Ray, human programmers could create nothing closer than a 31-byte version. Only months after their creation, hyperlife creatures had evolved an efficiency that their creators could not match. By the early 21st century, there was a thriving biosphere of artificial life on old Earth, both in the quickly evolving datasphere and in the macrosphere of human life. Although the breakthroughs of DNA computing, bubble memories, standard wavefront parallel processing, and hypernetworking were just being explored, human designers had created silicon-based entities of remarkable ingenuity. And they had created them by the billions. Microchips were in everything from chairs to cans of beans on store shelves to ground cars to artificial human body parts. The machines had grown smaller and smaller until the average human home or office was filled with tens or thousands of them. Tens of thousands of them. A worker's chair would recognize her as soon as she sat, bring up the file she had been working on in her crude silicon computer, chat with another chip in a coffee maker to heat up the coffee, enable the telecommunications grid to deal with the calls and faxes and crude electronic mail arrivals so that the worker would not be disturbed, interact with the main house or office computer so that the temperature was optimal, and so forth. In their stores, microchips in the cans of beans on the shelves noted their own price and price changes, ordered more of themselves when they were running short, kept track of the consumer's buying habits, and interacted with the store and the other commodities in it. This web of interaction became as complex and busy as the bubble and froth of old Earth's organic stew in its early oceans. For the record, as a brief aside, this was published in 1996. 1996. And he not only called how the Internet of Things would pan out, he called twiddling, I believe is the term we use now, of supermarket prices. I know the idea of the Internet of Things was around back then, particularly as it pertained to all these different devices communicating with each other, which would lead to smart devices. But I guess that lends itself eventually to twiddling once you realize you can put microchips in cans. Of course, I don't think we're quite doing that. We're just doing the next best thing, which is the price in front of the can. Anyway, some pretty impressive forethought there. Within 40 years... I read the last sentence there, right? This web of interaction became as complex and busy as the bubble and froth of old Earth's organic stew in its early oceans. Within 40 years of Tom Ray's 80-byte cell, humans were accustomed to talking to and otherwise interacting with the countless artificial life forms in their cars, their offices, their elevators, even in their bodies, as medical monitors and proto-shunts moved towards true nanotechnology. The Technocore came into autonomous being sometime during this period. Humanity had understood, quite correctly as it turned out, that for artificial life and artificial intelligence to be effective, it must be autonomous. It must evolve and diversify much as organic life had on the planet. And it did so. As well as the biosphere surrounding the planet, hyperlife now wrapped the world in a living datasphere. The core evolved not just as an abstract entity within the information flow of the web datasphere, but among the interactions of 1 billion tiny, autonomous, chip-driven micro-machines carrying out their mundane tasks in the human macro-world. Humanity and the billion-faceted, evolving core entity soon became as symbiotic as acacia plants and the marauding ants that protect, prune, and propagate the acacia as their sole food source. This is known as coevolution, and humans understand the concept on a truly cellular level, since so much of organic life on old Earth had been created and optimized by the reciprocal revolutionary dance. Might be that that's supposed to be evolutionary, but it says reciprocal revolutionary. But where human beings saw a comfortable symbiosis, the early AI entities were capable of seeing, only new opportunities for parasitism. Computers might be turned off, software programs might be terminated, but the hive mind of the proto-core had already moved into the emerging datasphere, and that could be turned off only by planetary catastrophe. The core eventually provided that catastrophe in the big mistake of VIII, but not before it had diversified its own medium and moved beyond a mere planetary scale. Early experiments in the Hawking drive, conducted and understood only by advanced core elements, had revealed the existence of the underlying Planck space reality of the void which binds. Core AIs of the day, DNA-based waveform in structure, driven by genetic algorithms parallel in function, completed the construction of the early Hawking drive ships and began design of the Farcaster network. Human beings always saw the Hawking drive as a shortcut through time and space, a realization of their old hyperdrive dreams. They conceptualized Farcaster portals as convenient holes punched through space-time. This was the human preconception, borne out by their own mathematical models, and confirmed by the most powerful core computing AIs. It was all a lie. Planck space, the void which binds, is a multidimensional medium with its own reality and, as the core was soon to learn, its own topography. The Hawking drive was not and is not a drive at all in the classic sense, but an entry device which touches on Planck space topography just long enough to change coordinates in the four-dimensional space-time continuum. Farcaster portals, on the other hand, allow actual entry to the void which binds medium. To humans, the reality was obvious. Step through a hole in space-time here, exit instantaneously via another Farcaster hole there. My Uncle Martin had a Farcaster home with adjoining rooms on dozens of different worlds. Farcasters created the hegemony's world web. Another invention, the Fat Line, a faster-than-light communications medium, allowed for instantaneous communication between star systems. All the prerequisites for an interstellar society had been met. But the core did not perfect the Hawking drive, the Farcaster, and the Fat Line for human convenience. Indeed, the core never perfected anything in their dealings with the void which binds. The core knew from the beginning that the Hawking drive was little more than a failed attempt to enter Planck space. Driving spacecraft via Hawking Drive was comparable, they knew, to moving an ocean-going vessel by setting off a series of explosions at its stern and riding the waves. Crudely effective, but wildly inefficient. They knew that despite all appearances to the contrary, and despite their claims of having created them, there were not millions of Farcaster portals during the height of the World Web. Only one. All Farcaster portals were actually a single entry door to blank space, manipulated across space-time to provide the functioning illusion of so many doors. If the Corps had attempted to explain the truth to humanity, they might have used the analogy of a flashlight beam being rapidly flashed around a closed room. There were not many sources of light, only one in rapid transition. But they never bothered to explain this. In truth, they have kept the secret to this day. And the Corps knew that the topography of the void which binds could be modulated to transmit information instantaneously via the fat line, but that this was a clumsy and destructive use of the medium of blank space, rather like communicating across a continent by means of artificially produced earthquakes. But it offered this fat line service to humanity without ever explaining it, because it served their purpose to do so. They had their own plans for the blank space medium. What the Corps realized in their earliest experiments was that the void which binds was the perfect medium for their own existence. No longer would they have to depend upon electromagnetic communication, or tight beam, or even modulated neutrino broadcast for their datasphere networks. No longer would they need human beings or robot probes to travel to the stars to expand the physical parameters of that network. By simply moving the primary elements of the Corps into the void which binds, the AI would have a safe hiding place from their organic rivals. A hiding place which was at once nowhere and everywhere. It was during this migration of the Corps personae from human-based dataspheres to the void which binds megasphere that the Corps discovered that blank space was not an empty universe. Behind its metadimensional hills and deep in its folded quantum space arroyos lurked something different. Someone different. There were intelligences there. The Corps probed and then recoiled in awe and terror at the potential power of these others. These were the lions and tigers and bears spoken of by Uman, the Corps persona who claimed to have created and killed my father. The Corps' retreat had been so hasty, its reconnaissance into the blank space universe so incomplete, that it had no idea where in real space-time these lions and tigers and bears dwelt, or if they existed in real time at all. Nor could the Corps AIs identify the others as having evolved from organic life as humanity had done, or from artificial life as they had. But the briefest glimpse had shown them that these others could manipulate time and space with the ease that human beings had once manipulated steel and iron. Such power was beyond comprehension. The Corps' reaction was pure panic and immediate retreat. This discovery and panic happened just as the Corps had initiated the action of destroying old Earth. My Uncle Martin's poem sings of how it was the Corps that arranged the big mistake of '08, the Kiev group's accidental dropping of a black hole into the guts of old Earth, but his poem does not tell, because he did not know, of the Corps' panic at the discovery of the lions and tigers and bears, and how they rushed to stop their planned destruction of old Earth. It was not easy to scoop a growing black hole out of the core of the collapsing planet, but the Corps designed a means and set about doing it in haste. Then the home planet disappeared. Not destroyed as it seemed to the humans, not saved as the Corps had hoped, just gone. The Corps knew that the lions and tigers and bears had to be the ones who took the Earth, but as to how, and to where, and for what reason, they had no clue. They computed the amount of energy necessary to forecast an entire planet away, and again they began quaking in their hyper-life boots. Such intelligences could explode the core of an entire galaxy to use as an energy source as easily as humans could light a campfire on a cold night. The core entities shit hyperlife bricks in their fear. I should back up here to explain the reasons for the core's decision to destroy Earth and their subsequent attempt to save it. The reasons go back to Tom Ray's 80-byte RAM creatures. As I explained, the life and intelligence which evolved in the datasphere medium knew no other form of evolution than parasitism, hyperparasitism, and hyperparasitism. But the core was aware of the shortcomings of absolute parasitism and knew that the only way it could grow beyond parasite status and parasite psychology was to evolve in response to the physical universe. That is, to have physical bodies as well as abstract core personae. The core had multiple sensory inputs and could create neural networks, but what it required for non-parasitic evolution was a constant and coordinated system of neural feedback circuits. That is, eyes, ears, tongues, limbs, fingers, toes, bodies. The core created cybrids for that purpose. Bodies grown from human DNA but connected to their core-based personae via fat line, but cybrids were difficult to monitor and became aliens when put down in a human landscape. Cybrids would never be comfortable on worlds inhabited by billions of organically evolved human beings. So the core made its early plans to destroy old Earth and to thin out the human race by a factor of 90%. The core did have plans for incorporating the surviving elements of the human race into their cybrid-inhabited universe after the death of the old Earth, using them as spare DNA stock and slave labor, much as we used androids. But the discovery of lions and tigers and bears and the panicked retreat from blank space complicated those plans. Until the threat of these others was assessed and eliminated, the core would have to continue its parasitic relationship with humanity. It devised the Farcasters in the old world web just for that purpose. To humans, the trip through the Farcaster medium was instantaneous. But in the timeless topography of blank space, the subjective dwell time there could be as long as the core wished. The core tapped into billions of human brains during that period, using human minds millions of times each standard day, to create a huge neural network for their own computing purposes. Every time a human stepped through a Farcaster portal, it was as if the core cut open that person's skull, removed the gray matter, laid the brain out on a workbench, and hooked it up to billions of other brains in their giant, parallel processing organic computer. The humans completed their step from blank space in a subjective instant of their time and never noticed the inconvenience. Told my father, the John Keats cybrid, that the core consisted of 3 warring camps: the ultimates, obsessed with creating their own god, the ultimate intelligence; the volatiles, who wished to eliminate humanity and get on with their own goals; and the stables, who wished to maintain the status quo vis-a-vis humankind. This explanation was an absolute lie. There were not, and are not 3 camps in the Technocore. There are billions. The core is the ultimate exercise in anarchy, hyperparasitism carried to its highest power. Core elements vie for power in alliances which might last centuries or microseconds. Billions of the parasitic personae ebb and flow in unholy alliances built to control or predict events. You see, core personae refuse to die unless they are forced to. Maynard Gladstone's death bomb attack on the Farcaster medium not only caused the fall of the Farcasters, it killed billions of would-be immortal core personae. But the individuals refused to make way for others without a fight. Yet, at the same time, the core hyperlife needs death for its own evolution. But death, in the core universe, has its own agenda. The Reaper program, which Tom Ray created more than 1,000 years ago, still exists in the core medium, mutated to 1,000,000 alternate forms. Never mentioned the Reapers as a core faction, but they represent a far greater bloc than the Ultimates. It was the Reapers who created and first controlled the physical construct known as the Shrike. It's an interesting footnote that those core personae which survive the Reapers do so not just through parasitism, but through a necrophilic parasitism. This is the technique by which the original 22-byte artificial lifeforms managed to evolve and survive in Tom Ray's virtual evolution machine so many centuries ago, by stealing the scattered copy code of other byte creatures who were reaped in the midst of reproducing. The core parasites not only have sex, they have sex with the dead. This is how millions of the mutated core personae survive today, by necrophilic hyperparasitism. What does the core want from humankind now? Why has it revitalized the Catholic Church and allowed the Pax to come into existence? How do the cruciforms work, and how do they serve the core? How do the so-called Gideon Drive Archangel ships really work, and what is their effect on the void which binds? And how is the core dealing with the threat of the lions and tigers and bears? These things we shall discuss another time. It is the day after we learn of the coming of the Pax, and I am working stone on the highest scaffolds. During the first days after my arrival, I think that Rachel, Theo, Jigme Norbu, George Sarong, and the others were doubtful if I could earn my keep on the construction site at Suan Kung Su. I admit that I had doubts of my own as I watched the hard work and skill on view here. But after a few days of literally learning the ropes of gear and climbing protocols on the rock faces, ledges, cables, scaffolds, and slideways in the area, I volunteered for work duty and was given a chance to fail. I did not fail. Aenea knew of my apprenticeship with Averil Hume, not only landscaping the huge Beak estates, but working stone and wood for follies and bridges, gazebos and towers. That work served me well here, and within 2 weeks I had graduated from the basic scaffolding crew to the select group of high riggers and stone workers laboring on the highest platforms. Aenea's design allowed for the highest structures to rise to the great rock overhang and for various walkways and parapets actually to be incorporated into that stone. This is what we are working on now, chiseling stone and laying brick for the walkway along the edge of nothing, our scaffolds perilously cantilevered far out and over the drop. In the past 3 months, my body has grown leaner and stronger, my reaction time quicker, and my judgment more careful as I work on sheer rock walls and slippery bonsai bamboo. Lomo Dondrub, the skilled flyer and climber, has volunteered to free climb the end of the overhang here to set anchor points for the final meters of scaffolding, and for the last hour, Vicky Grossley, Kim Byung-soon, Haruyuki Otaki, Kenshiro Endo, Changchi Kenchong, Labsang Samten, a few of the other brickworkers, masons, high riggers, and I have been watching as Lomo moves across the rock above the overhang without protection, moving like the proverbial old earth fly, his powerful arms and legs flexing under the thin material of his climbing garb, 3 points in touch with the slick, more than vertical stone at all times, while his free hand or foot feels for the slightest rough spot on which to rest, the smallest fissure or crack in which to work a bolt for our anchor. It is terrifying to watch him, but also a privilege. If we were able to go back in a time machine to watch Picasso paint, or George Wu read poetry, or Mina Gladstone give a speech. Oh, I missed the as at the beginning of that. It is terrifying to watch him, but also a privilege, as if we were able to go back in time in a time... Also a privilege, as if we were able to go back in a time machine to watch Picasso paint, or George Wu read poetry, or Mina Gladstone give a speech. A dozen times I am sure that Lomo is going to peel off and fall. It would take minutes for him to free fall into the poison clouds below. But each time he magically holds his place, or finds a friction point, or miraculously discovers a crack into which he can wedge a hand or finger to support his entire body. Finally, he is done. The lines are anchored and dangling, the cable points are secured, and Lomo slides down to his early fixed point, traverses 5 meters laterally, drops into the stirrups of the overhang gear, and swings onto our work platform like some legendary superhero coming in for a landing. Labsang Samten hands him an icy mug of rice beer. Kenshiro and Vicky pound him on the back. Changchi Kenchong, our master carpenter with the waxed mustaches, breaks into a bawdy song of praise. I shake my head and grin like an idiot. The day is exhilarating. A dome of blue sky, the sacred mountain of the north, Hung Shan, gleaming brightly across the cloud gap, and the winds moderate. Aenea tells me that the rainy season will descend on us within days, a monsoon from the south, bringing months of rain, slick rock, and eventual snow, but that seems unlikely and distant on such a perfect day as this. There is a touch at my elbow, and Aenea is there. She has been out on the scaffolding most of the morning, or hanging from her harness on the worked rock face, supervising the stone and brickwork of the walkway and parapets. I am still grinning from the vicarious adrenaline rush of watching Lomo. "Cables are ready to be rigged," I say. 3 or 4 more good days and the wooden walkway will be done here. Then your final platform there," I point to the ultimate edge of the overhang, "and voila! Your project's done except for the painting and polishing, kiddo." Aenea nods, but it is obvious that her mind is not on the celebration around Lomo or the imminent completion of her year of work. "Can you come walk with me a minute, Raul?" I follow her down the scaffolding ladders, onto one of the permanent levels, and out onto a stone ledge. Small green birds take wing from a fissure as we pass. From this angle, the temple hanging in air is a work of art. The painted woodwork gleams rather than glows its dark red. The staircases and railings and fretwork are elegant and complex. Many of the pagodas have their shoji walls slid open, and their prayer flags and bedclothes flutter in the warm breeze. There are 8 lovely shrines in the temple, in ascending order along the rising walkways, each pagoda shrine representing a step in the noble eightfold path as identified by the Buddha. The shrines line up on 3 axes relating to the 3 sections of the path: wisdom, morality, and meditation. On the ascending wisdom axis of staircases and platforms are the meditation shrines for right understanding and right thought. On the morality axis are right speech, right action, right livelihood, and right effort. These last meditation shrines can be reached only by hard climbing on a ladder rather than staircase because, as Aenea and Kempo Ngawang Tashi explained to me one evening early in my stay, the Buddha had meant for his path to be one of strenuous and unremitting commitment. The highest meditation pagodas are given over to contemplation of the last 2 steps on the Noble Eightfold Path, right mindfulness and right meditation. This final pagoda, I had noticed immediately, looks out only onto the stone wall of the cliff face. I also had noticed that there were no statues of Buddha in the temple. The little that Grandam had explained to me about Buddhism when I'd asked as a child, having run across a reference in an old book from the Moor's End Library, was that Buddhists revered and prayed to statues in the likeness of the Buddha. Where were they? I had asked Aenea. She had explained that on old Earth Buddhist thought had been grouped into 2 major categories. Hinayana, an older school of thought given the pejorative term meaning lesser vehicle, as in salvation, by the more popular schools of the Mahayana, or the self-proclaimed greater vehicle. There had once been 18 schools of Hinayana teaching, all of which had dealt with Buddha as a teacher and urged contemplation and study of his teachings rather than worship of him. But by the time of the big mistake, only one of those schools survived, the Theravada, and that only in remote sections of disease and famine-ravaged Sri Lanka and Thailand, 2 political provinces of old Earth. All the other Buddhist schools carried away on the Hejira had belonged to the Mahayana category, which focused on veneration of Buddhist statuary, meditation for salvation, saffron robes, and the other trappings that Grandam had described to me. But, Aenea had explained, on Tien Shan, the most Buddhist-influenced world in the Outback or Old Hegemony, Buddhism had evolved backward toward rationality, contemplation, study, and careful, open-minded analysis of Buddha's teaching. There were no statues to the Buddha at Suan Kung Su. We stop walking at the end of this stone ledge. Birds soar and circle below us, waiting for us to leave so that they can return to their fissure nests. "What is it, kiddo?" "The reception at the Winter Palace in Potala is tomorrow night," she says. Her face is flushed and dusty from her morning's work on the high scaffolds. I notice that she has scraped a rough line above her brow and that there are a few tiny crimson drops of blood. "Charles Chi Kyap Kempo is putting together an official party numbering no more than 10 to attend." She continues, "Kempo Nga Wang Tashi will be in it, of course, as will Overseer Tsipon Shakabpa, the Dalai Lama's cousin Gallo, his brother Labsang, Lomo Dondrub because the Dalai Lama's heard of his feats and would like to meet him, Tromo Trochi of Domu as trade agent, and one of the foremen to represent the workers, either George or Jigme." "I can't imagine one going without the other," I say. "I can't either," says Aenea, "but I think it will have to be George. He talks. Perhaps Jigme will walk there with us and wait outside the palace." "That's 8, I say. Aenea takes my hand. Her fingers are roughened by work and abrasion, but are still, I think, the softest and most elegant human digits in the known universe. "I'm 9. She says. "There's going to be a huge crowd there, parties from all the towns and provinces in the hemisphere. The odds are that we won't get within 20 meters of anyone from the packs." "Or that we'll be the first to be introduced," I say. "Murphy's Law and all that." "Yeah," says Aenea, and the smile I see is exactly the one I had seen on the face of my 11-year-old friend when something mischievous and perhaps a bit dangerous was afoot. "Want to go as my date?" I let out a breath. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I say. "18. On the night before the Dalai Lama's reception, I am tired, but I cannot sleep. Betek is away, staying at Jokung with George and Jigme and the 30 loads of construction material that should have come in yesterday, but that were held up in the Fissure City by a porter's strike. Betek will hire new porters in the morning and lead the procession the last few kilometers to the temple. Restless, I roll off my futon and slip into whipcord trousers, a faded shirt, my boots, and the light therm jacket. When I step out of my sleeping pagoda, I notice lantern light warming the opaque windows and shoji door of Aenea's pagoda. She is working late again. Walking softly so as not to disturb her by rocking the platform, I clamber down a ladder to the main level of the temple hanging in air. It always amazes me how empty this place is at night. At first I thought it was the result of the construction workers, most of whom live in the cliffside crates around Jokung, being gone, but I've come to realize how few people spend their nights in the temple complex. George and Jigme usually sleep in their foreman's shack, but are in Jokung with Betek tonight. The abbot Kempo Nga Wang Tashi stays with the monks some nights, but this night he has returned to his formal home in Jokung. A handful of monks prefer their austere quarters here to the formal monastery in Jokung, including Chimdin, Labsang Samten, and the woman, Donka Nyapso. Occasionally the flyer, Lomo, stays at the monks' quarters or in an empty shrine here, but not tonight. Lomo has left early for the Winter Palace, having mentioned his thought of climbing Nanda Devi south of Potala. So while I can see a soft lantern glow coming from the monks' quarters hundreds of meters away on the lowest level of the eastern edge of the complex, a glow that is extinguished even as I watch it, the rest of the temple complex is dark and quiet in the starlight. Neither the oracle nor the other bright moons have risen yet, although the eastern horizon is beginning to glow a bit with their coming. The stars are incredibly bright, almost as brilliant and unwavering as when seen from space. There are thousands visible this night, more than I remembered from Hyperion's or Old Earth's night sky, and I crane my neck until I can see the slowly moving star that is the tiny moon where the ship is presumably hiding. I am carrying the comm unit/Diski journal, and all it would take is a whisper to query the ship. But Aenea and I have decided that with the packs so near, even tight beam transmissions to or from the ship should be reserved for emergency situations. I sincerely hope that no emergency situations will arise soon. Taking the ladders, staircases, and short bridges down the west side of the temple complex, I walk back along the brick and stone ledge beneath the lowest structures. The night wind has come up, and I can hear the creak and groan of the wooden timbers as entire platform levels adjust themselves to the wind and chill. Prayer flags flap above me, and I see starlight on the cloud tops where they curl against the ridge rocks so far below. The wind is not quite strong enough to make the distinctive wolf's howl that woke me my first few nights here, but its passage through the fissures and timbers and cracks sets the world muttering and whispering around me. I reach the wisdom staircase and climb up through the right understanding meditation pavilion, standing a moment at the balcony to look out at the dark and silent monk's quarters perched by itself on a boulder to the east. I recognize the infinite wood-carving skill and care of the sisters, Cuckoo and Keisei, in the elaborate carvings just under my fingertips here. Wrapping my jacket tighter in the rising wind, I climb the spiral staircase to the platform pagoda for right thought. On the east wall of this restored pagoda, Aenea has designed a large, perfectly round window looking east toward the dip in the ridgeline where the oracle makes its first appearance and the moon is rising now, its bright rays illuminating the ceiling of this pagoda and then the rear wall, where the words from the Sutta Nipata, Scripture, are set into the plaster wall. As a flame blown out by the wind goes to rest and cannot be defined, so the wise man freed from individuality goes to rest and cannot be defined. Gone beyond all images, gone beyond the power of words. I know that this passage deals with the enigmatic death of Buddha, but I read it in the moonlight with the thought of how it might apply to Aenea or myself, or to the two of us. It does not seem to apply. Unlike the monks who labor here for enlightenment, I have no urge whatsoever to go beyond individuality. The world itself, all the myriad worlds I have been privileged to see and walk upon, are what fascinate and delight me. I have no wish to put the world and my sense images of the world behind me. And I know that Aenea feels the same about life. That involvement with it is like the Catholic Communion, only the world is the host, and it must be chewed. Still, the thought of the essence of things, of people, of life, going beyond all images and the power of words, this resonates with me. I have been trying, and failing, to put even the essence of this place, these days, into words, and discovering the futility of it. Leaving the wisdom axis, I cross the long platform for cooking and common meals, and begin up the morality axis of stairways, bridges, and platforms. The oracle is free of the ridgeline now, and the light from it and its two attendants paint the rock and red wood around me in thick moon paint. I pass through the pavilions for right speech and right action, pausing to catch my breath in the circular pagoda for right livelihood. There is a bamboo barrel of drinking water just outside the pagoda for right effort, and I drink deeply there. Prayer flags flutter and snap along the terraces and eaves as I move softly across the long connecting platform to the highest structures. The meditation pavilion for right mindfulness is part of Aenea's recent work and still smells of fresh bonsai cedar. 10 meters higher along the steep ladder, the right meditation pavilion perches out over the bulk of the temple, its window looking out on the ridge wall. I stand there for several minutes, realizing for the first time that the shadow of the pagoda itself falls upon that slab of rock when the moon is rising as it is now, and that Aenea has designed the roof of the pavilion so that its shadow connects with the natural clefts and discolorations in the rock to create a shadow character that I recognize as the Chinese character for Buddha. At this moment I am taken by a chill, although the wind is not blowing any harder than it has been. Goosebumps rise along my forearms, and the back of my neck feels cold. I realize, no, see, that in that instant, that Aenea's mission, whatever it is doomed to failure. She and I are both going to be captured, interrogated, probably tortured, and executed. My promises to the old poet on Hyperion were so much wasted breath. Bring down the Pax, I had said. The Pax, with its billions of faithful, millions of men and women in arms, thousands of warships. Bring back old Earth, I had agreed. Well, I had visited it. I look out the window to see the sky, but there is only the rock wall of the moon. I look out the window to see the sky, but there is only the rock wall in the moonlight and the slowly cohering shadow character of the Buddha's name, the 3 vertical strokes like ink on slate-colored vellum, the 3 horizontal strokes flowing around and together, making 3 white faces in the negative spaces, 3 faces staring at me in the dark. I had promised to protect Aenea. I vow that I will die doing that. Shaking off the chill and the premonition, I go out onto the meditation platform, clip to a cable, and hum 30 meters across the void to the platform below the top terrace where Aenea and I and hum 30 meters across the void to the platform below the top terrace where Aenea and I have sleeping pagodas. As I climb the last ladder to the highest level, I am thinking, perhaps I will sleep now. I made no notes on this in the Diski journal. I remember it now as I write it. Aenea's light was out. I was pleased. She stayed up too late, worked too hard. The high work scaffolds and cliff cables were no place for an exhausted architect. I stepped into my own shack, slid shut the shoji door, and kicked off my boots. Things were as I had left them. The outer screen wall slid back a bit, moonlight bright across my sleeping mat, the wind rattling the walls in its soft conversation with the mountains. Neither of my lanterns was lit, but I had the light from the moon and my memory of the small room in the dark. The floor was bare tatami except for my sleeping futon and a single chest near the door that held my rucksack, few food items, beer mug, the rebreathers I'd brought from the ship, and my climbing gear. There was nothing to trip over. I hung my jacket on the hook near the door, splashed water on my face from the basin on the chest, and stripped off my shirt, socks, trousers, and underwear, stuffing them into the ditty bag in the chest. Tomorrow was laundry day. Sighing, feeling the premonition of doom I'd felt on the meditation pavilion now fading into simple fatigue, I walked over to the sleeping mat. I have always slept naked except for when in the home guard and during my trip to the consul's ship with my 2 friends. There was the slightest of movements in the darkness beyond the bright stripe of moonlight, and, startled, I dropped into a fighting crouch. Nakedness makes one feel more vulnerable than usual. Then I realized, Aebetic must have returned early. I unclenched my right fist. "Raul?" said Aenea. She leaned forward into the moonlight. She had wrapped my sleeping blanket around the lower part of her body, but her shoulders and breasts and abdomen were bare. The oracle touched her hair and cheekbones with soft light. I opened my mouth to speak, started to turn back toward my clothes or jacket, decided not to walk that far, and dropped on one knee to the sleeping mat, pulling up the futon's sheet to cover myself. I was not a prude, but this was Aenea. What was she? Raul, she said again, and this time there was no question in her voice. She moved closer to me on her knees. The blanket fell away from her. Aenea, I said stupidly. Aenea, you don't really... She set her finger on my lips and removed it a second later, but before I could speak she leaned closer and pressed her lips where her finger had been. Every time I had ever touched my young friend, the contact had been electric. I have described this before and always felt foolish discussing it, but I ascribed it to her... What? Every time I had ever touched my young friend, the contact had been electric. I have described this before and always felt foolish discussing it, but I ascribed it to her... ellipsis, an aura, ellipsis, a charge of personality. Okay, I got it. I have described this before. Okay, every time I had ever touched my young friend, the contact had been electric. I have described this before and always felt foolish discussing it, but I ascribed it to her. An aura, a charge of personality. It was real, not a metaphor. But never had I felt the surge of electricity between us as in this instant. For a second I was passive, receiving the kiss rather than sharing in it. But then the warmth and insistence of it overcame thought, overcame doubt, overcame all my other senses in every nuance of the word. And then I was returning her kiss, putting my arms around her to pull her closer even as she slid her arms under mine and ran strong fingers up my back. More than 5 years ago for her, when she had kissed me farewell at the river on old Earth, her kiss had been urgent, electric, filled with questions and messages, but still a 16-year-old girl's kiss. This kiss was the warm, moist, open touch of a woman, and I responded to it in an instant. We kissed for an eternity. I was vaguely aware of my own nudity and excitement as something I should be concerned about, embarrassed about, but it was a distant thing, secondary to the expanding warmth and urgency of the kisses that would not stop. When finally our lips came apart, feeling swollen, almost bruised, wanting to be kissed again, we kissed each other's cheeks, eyelids, forehead, ears. I lowered my face and kissed the hollow, perfumed scent of her skin. She moved forward on her knees, arching her back slightly so that her breasts touched my cheek. I cupped one and kissed the nipple almost reverently. Aenea cupped the back of my head in her palm. I could feel her breath on me, quickening, as she bowed her face toward me. Wait, I said, pulling my face up and leaning back. No, Aenea, are you... I don't think... Shh, she said, leaning over me again, kissing me again, pulling back so that her dark eyes seemed to fill the world. Shh, Raul, yes. She kissed me again, leaning to her right so that we both reclined on the sleeping mat, still kissing, the rising breeze rattling the rice paper walls, the entire platform rocking to the depth of our kiss and the motion of our bodies. It is a problem to tell of such things, to share the most private and sacred of moments. It feels like a violation to put such things into words, and a lie not to. To see and feel one's beloved naked for the first time is one of life's pure, irreducible epiphanies. If there is a true religion in the universe, it must include that truth of contact or be forever hollow. To make love to the one true person who deserves that love is one of the few absolute rewards of being a human being, balancing all of the pain, loss, awkwardness, loneliness, idiocy, compromise, and clumsiness that go with the human condition. To make love to the right person makes up for a lot of mistakes. I had never made love to the right person before. I knew that even as Aenea and I first kissed and lay against each other, even before we began moving slowly, then quickly, then slowly again. I realized that I had never really made love to anyone before. That the young soldier on leave sex with friendly women, or the bargeman and bargewoman we have the opportunity, so why not, sex, that I had thought had explored and discovered, that I had thought had explored and discovered everything to do with the subject, was not even the beginning. This was the beginning. I remember Aenea rising above me at one point, her hand hard on my chest, her own chest slick with sweat, but she was still looking at me so intensely and so warmly that it was as if we were connected intimately by our gaze as surely as by our thighs and genitals. And I was to remember that instant every time we made love in the future, even as I seemed to be remembering forward to all those future times, and even during these first few even as I seem to be remembering forward to all those future times, even during these first few moments of our intimacy. Lying together in the moonlight, the sheets and blankets and the futon curled and thrown around us, the cool wind from the north drying the sweat on our bodies, her cheek on my chest and my thigh across her hip, we kept touching each other, her fingers playing with the hair on my chest, my fingers tracing the line of her cheek, the sole of my foot sliding up and down the back of her leg, curling around her strong calf muscles. "Was this a mistake?" I whispered. "No," she whispered back. "Unless—" My heart pounded. "Unless what?" "Unless you didn't get those shots in the home guard that I'm sure you got," she whispered. I was so anxious that I did not hear the teasing quality in her voice. "What? Shots? What?" I said, rolling onto my elbow. "Oh, shots. Shit. You know I did. Jesus." "I know you did," whispered Aenea, and I could hear the smile now. When we Hyperion lads had joined the Home Guard, the authorities had given us the usual battery of PAX-approved injections: anti-malaria, anti-cancer, antivirus, and birth control. In a PAX universe where the vast majority of individuals chose the cruciform, chose to attempt to be immortal, birth control was a given. One could apply to PAX authorities for the antidote after marriage, or simply buy it on the black market when it was time to start a family. Or, if one chose neither the way of the cross nor a family, it would last until old age, or death made the issue moot. I had not thought of that shot for years. Actually, I think A. Bedeckett asked me about those shots on the consul's ship a decade ago, when we were discussing preventative medicine, and I had mentioned the Home Guard induction battery, our young friend of 11 or 12 curled on a couch there in the holopit level, reading a book from the ship's library, seemingly not paying attention at all. "No," I said, still on my elbow. "I mean a mistake. You're—" "Me," she whispered. 21 standard years old," I finished. "I'm—" "You," she whispered. 11 standard years older than that." "Incredible," said Aenea. Her whole face was in the moonlight as she looked up at me. "You can do math at such a moment." I sighed and rolled over on my stomach. The sheets smelled of us. The wind was still rising, and now it rattled the walls. "I'm cold," whispered Aenea. In the days and months to come, I would have held her in my arms if she said such a thing, but that night I responded literally and stood to slide shut the shoji screen. The wind was colder than usual. "No," she said. "What?" "Don't close it all the way." She was sitting up with the sheet raised to just below her breasts. "But it's—" "The moonlight's on you," Aenea whispered. Her voice may have caused my physical response, or the sight of her waiting for me in the blankets. Besides holding in our own scents, the room smelled like fresh straw because of the new tatami and the ryokan in the ceiling, and of the fresh, cool air of the mountains. but the cold breeze did not slow my reaction to her. "Come here," she whispered, and opened the blanket like a cape to fold me in. The next morning, and I am working on setting the overhang walkway in place, and it is as if I am sleepwalking. Part of the problem is lack of sleep. The oracle had set, and the east was paling with morning when Aenea slipped back to her own pavilion. But the major reason is sheer, simple stupefaction. Life has taken a turn that I had never anticipated, never imagined. I am setting supports into the cliff for the high walk with the high riggers Haruyuki, Kenshiro, and Wojtek Meyer moving ahead, drilling holes in the stone, while Kim Byung-soon and Vicky Grossley lay brick behind and beneath us, and carpenter Changchi Kenchong begins work behind me on the laying of the wood floor of the terrace itself. There would be nothing to catch the high riggers and me if we fall from the wooden beams if Lomo had not done his free-climbing exhibition yesterday and set fixed ropes and cables in place. Now, as we jump from beam to beam, we just clip one of our harness carabiners into place on the next rope. I have fallen before and had the fall arrested by this sort of fixed rope. Each can hold 5 times my weight. Now I leap from set beam to set beam, pulling along the next beam as it dangles from one of the cables. The wind is coming up and threatens to hurl me off into space, but I balance myself with one hand touching the hanging beam and 3 fingers on the rock face itself. I reach the end of the 3rd fixed rope, unclip, and prepare to clip on to the 4th of 7 lines Lomo has rigged. I do not know what to think about last night. That is, I know how I feel, exhilarated, confused, ecstatic, in love, but I don't know how to think about it. I tried to intercept Aenea before breakfast in the communal dining pavilion near the monks' quarters, but she had already eaten and headed out to where the terrace carvers had run into trouble on the new eastern walkway. Then A. Betic, George Sarong, and Jigme Norbu had shown up with the porters, and an hour or 2 was consumed sorting materials and transporting the beams, chisels, lumber, and other items to the new high scaffolds. I had headed out onto the eastern ledge before the beamwork began, but A. Betic and Saipon Chakabpa were conferring with Aenea, so I jogged back to the scaffolds and got busy. Now I was jumping to the last beam set in place this morning, ready to install the next one in the hole Haruyuki and Kenshiro have chiseled and blasted into the rock with tiny, shaped charges. Then Wojtek and Vicky will cement the post in place. Within 30 minutes it will be firm enough for Changchi to set a work platform on. I've become accustomed to leaping from beam to beam, catching my balance and squatting to set the next beam in place, and I do so now on the last beam, pinwheeling my left arm to keep my balance, while my fingers stay in contact with the beam balancing from the cable. Suddenly the beam swings out too far ahead of me, and I am off balance, leaning into nothing. I know that the safety line will catch me, but I hate to fall and be dangling here between the last beam and the newly drilled hole. If I don't have enough momentum to kick back to the beam, I'll have to wait for Kenshiro or one of the other riggers to kick out and rescue me. In a fraction of a second, I make up my mind and jump, catching the swinging beam and kicking out hard. Because the safety rope has several meters of slack before it will catch me, all of my weight is on my fingers now. The beam is too thick for me to get a good grip on it, and I can feel my fingers sliding on the iron-hard wood. But rather than go dropping to the elastic end of my fixed line, I struggle to hang on, succeed in swinging the heavy post back toward the last beam in place, and jump the last 2 meters, landing on the slippery beam and flailing my arms for balance. Laughing at my own foolishness, I catch my balance and stand panting for a moment, watching the clouds broiling against the rock several thousand meters below my feet. Changchi Kenchong is leaping from beam to beam toward me, clipping on to the fixed ropes with a rapid urgency. There is something like horror in his eyes, and for a second I am sure that something has happened to Aenea. My heart begins beating so hard, and anxiety washes over me so swiftly that I almost lose my balance. But I catch it again and stand balancing on the last fixed beam, waiting for Changchi with a sense of dread. When he leaps to the last beam with me, Changchi is too winded to speak. He gestures toward me urgently, but I do not understand the motion. Perhaps he had seen my comical swing and dance and leap with the dangling beam and was concerned. To show him that it is all right, I reach up to my harness line to show him that the carabiner is locked tight to the safety line. There is no carabiner there. I never tied on to the last fixed rope. I have been doing all this leaping, balancing, hanging, and jumping with no safety line. There has been nothing between me and... Feeling a sudden stab of vertigo and nausea, I stagger 3 steps to the cliff wall and lean against the cold stone. The overhang tries to push me away, and it is as if the entire mountain is tilting outward, pushing me off the beam. That's a pretty good description of vertigo right there. Changchi tugs Lomo's fixed line around, lifts a beaner from my harness rack, and clips me on. I nod my appreciation and try not to lose my breakfast while he is here with me. 10 meters around the bend in the cliff, Haruyuki and Kenshiro are gesturing. They have blasted another perfect hole. They want me to catch up with setting the beams in place. The party departing for the Dalai Lama's evening reception for the Pax at Potala leaves just after the noon meal in the common dining hall. I see Aenea there, but except for a meaningful exchange of glances and a smile from her that makes my knees weak, we have no private communication. We assemble on the lowest level with hundreds of workers, monks, cooks, scholars, and porters waving and cheering from the platforms above. Rain clouds are beginning to curl and spill between the low gaps in the eastern ridgeline, but the sky above Swan Kung Su is still blue, and the red prayer flags flapping from the high terraces stand out with almost shocking clarity. We are all dressed in travel clothes, our formal reception clothing carried in waterproof shoulder-strap satchels, or, in my case, my rucksack. The Dalai Lama's receptions are traditionally held late at night, and we have more than 10 hours until our presence is required. But it is a 6-hour trip on the highway, and couriers and one flyer coming into Jokung earlier that day have told of bad weather beyond the Kunlun Ridge, so we step off lively enough. The order of march is set by protocol. Charles Chikyap Kempo, mayor of Jokung and Lord Chamberlain of the Temple Hanging in Air, walks a few paces ahead of his near peer, Kempo Ngawang Tashi, abbot of the temple. Both men's traveling clothes are more resplendent than my shot at formal wear, and they are surrounded by small hornet clusters of aides, monks, and security people. Behind the priest-politicians walk Gyalo Thondup, the young monk and cousin to the current Dalai Lama, and Labsang Samten, the third-year monk who is the Dalai Lama's brother. They have the easy stride and easier laugh of young men at the peak of physical health and mental clarity. Their white teeth gleam in their brown faces. Labsang is wearing a brilliant red climbing chuba that gives the appearance of his being an ambulatory prayer flag in our procession as we head west along the narrow walkway to the Jokung fissure. Tsipon Shakabpa, the official overseer of Aenea's project, walks with George Sarong, our chubby construction foreman. George's inseparable companion, Jigme Norbu, is absent now. His feelings hurt by not being invited, Jigme has stayed behind at the temple. I believe that this is the first time that I have seen George where he is not smiling. Tsipon makes up for George's silence, however, telling stories with waving arms and extravagant gestures. Several of their workers hike with them, at least as far as Jokung. Tromo Trochi of Domu, the flamboyant trade agent from the south, walks with his only companion for so many months on the highways, an oversized zygote packbrid, laden with the trader's goods. The zygote has 3 bells hung from its shaggy neck, and they chime like the temple's prayer bells as we walk along. Lomo Dondrub is to meet us in Potala, but his presence in the party is represented symbolically on the zygote's topmost pack duffel by a swatch of new flight fabric for his paraglider. Aenea and I bring up the rear of the procession. Several times I try to talk about last night, but she silences me with a finger to her lips and a nod in the direction of the nearby trader and other members of the procession. I settle for small talk about the last days of work on the temple overhang pavilion and walkways, but my mind continues to jostle with questions. Soon we are in Jokung, where the ramps and walkways are lined with crowds waving pennants and prayer flags. From the fissure terraces and cliff shacks, citizens of the city cheer their mayor and the rest of us. Just beyond the fissure city of Jokung, near the jump-off platforms of the only cableway we will be using on this trip to Potala, we encounter another party headed to the Dalai Lama's reception, the Dorje Famo and her 9 female priests. The Dorje Famo travels in a palanquin carried by 4 heavily muscled males because she is the abbess of Samden Gompa, an all-male monastery some 30 clicks out along the south wall of the same ridge that holds the temple hanging in air along its north wall. The Dorje Famo is 94 standard years old and was discovered to be the incarnation of the original Dorje Famo, the Thunderbolt Sow, when she was 3 standard years old. She is a woman of immense importance and a separate monastery for women. The Oracle Gompa at Yamdrok Tso, some 60 clicks farther along the dangerous ridge wall, has held her as its prefect and avatar for more than 70 standard years. Now the Thunderbolt Sow, her 9 female priest companions, and about 30 male carriers and guards are waiting at the cableway to attach the palanquin's massive carabiner clamps. The Dorje Famo peers through her curtains, spies our party, and beckons Aenea over. I know from Aenea's offhand comments that she has traveled to the Oracle Gompa at Yamdrok Tso several times to meet with the Sow, and that the two are fast friends. I also know from Betik's comments to me in confidence that the Dorje Famo has recently told her female priests and monks at the Oracle Gompa and the male monks at Samden Gompa that it is Aenea, not His Holiness the current Dalai Lama, who is the incarnation of the living Buddha of mercy. Word of this heresy has spread, according to Betik, but because of the Thunderbolt Sow's popularity across the world of Tian Shan, the Dalai Lama has not yet responded to the impertinence. Now, as I watch the 2 women, my young Aenea and the ancient form in the palanquin, chat and laugh... let's try that again. Now I watch as the 2 women, my young Aenea and the ancient form in the palanquin, chat and laugh easily as both parties wait to cross the cableway across the Langma abyss. The Dorje Famo must have insisted that we precede her group, for the carriers move the palanquin back out of the way, and the 9 female priests bow deeply as Aenea motions our group forward on the platform. Charles Chikyap Kempo and Kempo Ngawang Tashi look discomfited as they allow their aides to clip them onto the cable, not out of concern for their safety, I know, but out of some breach of protocol that I missed and am not particularly interested in. At that moment I am interested in getting Aenea alone and talking with her, or perhaps just kissing her again. It rains hard during the walk to Potala. During my 3 months here, I've experienced more than a few summer showers, but this is a serious pre-monsoon rain, chilling, icy, with curling tendrils of fog that close around us. We clear the 1 cableway transit before the clouds close in, but by the time we are approaching the east side of Kunlun Ridge, the highway is slick with ice. The highway consists of rock ledges, bricked pathways on the sheer cliffside, high wooden walkways along the northwest ridge of Huashan, the Flower Mountain, and a long series of platform walkways and suspension bridges connecting those icy ridgelines with Kunlun. I should probably mention here, by the way, that highway is two separate words, capital H, capital W. Highway, as in the way is high. It's also, if my experiences playing the old classic Sonic Sega Genesis games is any judge, the faster way. Top route always fastest. Then there is the second longest suspension bridge on the planet connecting Kunlun Ridge with Fari Ridge, followed by another series of walkways, bridges, and ledges heading southwest along the east face of Fari Ridge to Fari Marketplace. There we pass through the fissure and follow the ledge road almost due west to Potala. Normally, this is a 6-hour walk in the sunshine, but this afternoon it is a dreary, dangerous trudge through the curling fog and icy rain. The aides traveling with the Mayor/Lord Chamberlain Charles Chi Kyap Kempo and Abbot Kempo Nga Wang Tashi attempt to shelter their worthies under bright red and yellow umbrellas. Bright red and yellow umbrellas, but the icy ledge is often narrow, and the worthies frequently must get wet as they go ahead in single file. The suspension bridges are nightmares to cross. The floor of each is just a single heavily braided hemp cable with hemp ropes rising vertically, horizontal side ropes for railings, and a second thick cable above one's head. And although it is usually child's play to balance on the lower cable while keeping contact with the side ropes, it takes complete concentration in this driving rain. But all of the locals have done this through dozens of monsoons, and they move along quickly. It is only Aenea and I who hesitate as the bridges flex and toss under the party's weight, the icy ropes threatening to slip out of our hands. Despite the storm, or perhaps because of it, someone has lighted the highway torches all along the east face of Fari Ridge, and the braziers burning through the thick fog help us find our way as the wooden walkways turn, bend, rise, descend icy staircases, and lead out to more bridges. We arrive in Fari Marketplace just at dusk, although it seems much later because of the gloom. Other groups bound for the Winter Palace join us there, and there are at least 70 people. That's 70. And there are at least 70 people headed west together past the fissure. The Dorje Famo's palanquin still bobs along with us, and I suspect that others besides myself are a bit envious of her dry perch in there. I confess that I am disappointed. We had planned to arrive at Potala in the twilight, while there was still alpenglow lighting. I confess that I am disappointed. We had planned to arrive at Potala in the twilight, while there was still alpenglow lighting the north-south ridges and the palace before. And I had been looking forward to seeing this region. As it is, the broad highway between Fari and Potala is just a series of torchlit ledges and walkways. I have brought the flashlight laser in my pack, although whether as a futile gesture for defense should things turn bad at the palace, or for finding our way in the dark, I am not sure. Ice coats the rocks, the platforms, the hemp cable railings along this most well-traveled of walkways, as well as the stairs. I cannot imagine being on the cableway this night, but rumor has it that several of the more adventurous guests are traveling that way. We arrive at the Forbidden City some 2 hours before the reception is scheduled to begin. The clouds have lifted a bit, the rain relents, and our first glimpse of the Winter Palace takes my breath away and makes me forget my disappointment of not having approached it in the twilight. The Winter Palace is built on a great peak rising from the Yellow Hat Ridge, with the higher peaks of Coconor behind it, and our first glimpse through the clouds is of Drepung, the surrounding monastery that houses 35,000 monks, tier upon tier of tall stone buildings rising up the vertical slopes, its thousands of windows glowing with lantern light, torches at balconies, terraces, and entrances, while behind the Drepung and above it, with gold roofs touching the ceiling of boiling clouds, rises Potala, the winter palace of the Dalai Lama, ablaze with light and backlighted, even in the stormy darkness, by the lightning-lit peaks of Coconor. The aides and fellow travelers turn back here, and only we invited pilgrims press on into the Forbidden City. The highway now flattens and broadens to a true highway, an avenue 50 meters wide, paved with gold stones, lined with torches, and surrounded by countless temples, chortens, lesser gompas, outbuildings for the imposing monastery, and military guard posts. The rain has stopped, but the avenue glistens goldly while hundreds upon hundreds of brightly garbed pilgrims and residents of the Forbidden City bustle to and fro in front of the huge walls and gates of the Drepung and the Potala. Monks in saffron robes move in small, silent groups. Palace officials in brilliant red and rich purple gowns and yellow hats, looking like inverted saucers, walk purposefully past soldiers in blue uniforms with black and white striped pikes. Official messengers jog by in skin-tight outfits of orange and red or gold and blue. Women of the court glide across the gold stones in long silk dresses of sky blue, deep lapis lazuli, and daring cobalt, their trains making soft slithering sounds on the wet pavement. Priests from the Red Hat sect are instantly recognizable with their inverted saucer hats of crimson silk and crimson fringe, while the Drungpas, the Wooded Valley people, stride by with woolly hats of zygote fur, their costumes adorned with brilliant white, red, tan, and gold feathers, carrying their great gold ceremonial swords tucked into their sashes. Finally, the common folk of the Forbidden City are little less colorful than the high officials. The cooks and gardeners and servants and tutors and masons and personal valets, all bedecked in silk chubas of green and blue or gold and orange, and those who work in the Dalai Lama's quarters of the Winter Palace, several thousand strong, glimpsed in the crimson and gold. Everyone wearing the zygote-banded silk hats, with stiff brims some 50 centimeters broad, to preserve their pale palace complexions on sunny days, and to ward off the rain during monsoon season. Our wet band of pilgrims seems dull and shabby in these surroundings, but I have little thought of our own appearance as we pass through a 60-meter-tall gate in one of the outer walls of the Drepung Monastery and begin to cross the Ki Chu Bridge. This bridge is 20 meters wide, 115 meters long, and made of the most modern carbon plasteel. It shines like black chrome. Beneath it is nothing. The bridge spans a terminal fissure in the ridge line and drops thousands of meters to the phosgene clouds below. On the east side, the side from which we approach, the structures of the Drepung rise 2 or 3 kilometers above us, flat walls and glowing windows, and the air above us laced with spiderweb upon spiderweb of official cable shortcuts between the monastery and the palace proper. On the west side, ahead of us, the Potala rises more than 6 kilometers on the cliff faces, its thousands of stone facets and hundreds of gold roofs reflecting the flickering lightning from the low clouds above it. In case of attack, the Ki Chu Bridge can retract into the western cliff in less than 30 seconds, leaving no stairway, foothold, ledge, or window for half a kilometer of vertical stone to the first ramparts above. The bridge does not retract as we cross it. The sides are lined with troopers in ceremonial garb, each carrying a deadly serious pike or energy rifle. At the far end of the Qi Chu, we pause at the Pargo Kailing. The Pargo Kaling, the western gate, an ornate arch 85 meters long. Light glows from within the giant arch, breaking out through 1,000 intricate designs, the brightest glow coming from the two great eyes, each more than 10 meters across, that stare unblinkingly across the Qi Chu and the Drepung to the east. We each pause as we pass under the Pargo Kaling. Our first step beyond it will bring us onto the grounds of the Winter Palace itself, although the actual doorway is still some 30 paces ahead of us. Inside that doorway are the 1,000 steps that will take us up to the palace proper. Aenea has told me that pilgrims have come from all over Tianshan by walking on their knees, or in some cases prostrating themselves at every step, literally measuring the hundreds of thousands of kilometers with their bodies, just to be allowed to pass under the western gate and to touch this last section of Qi Chu Bridge with their foreheads out of homage to the Dalai Lama. Aenea and I step across together, glancing at one another. After presenting our invitations to the guards and officials within the main entrance portal, we ascend the 1,000 stairs. I am amazed to find that the stairway is an escalator, although Tromo Trochi of Domu whispers that it is often left unactivated, to allow the faithful a final exertion before being allowed into the upper reaches of the palace. Above, on the first public levels, there is another flurry of invitation checking. Servants divesting us of our wet outer robes, and other servants escorting us to rooms in which we might bathe and change. Lord Chamberlain Charles Chi-Kyap Kempo is entitled to a small suite of rooms on the 78th level of the palace, and after what seems like further kilometers of walking down outside halls, the windows to our right showing the red rooftops of the Drepung Monastery flickering and gleaming in the storm light, we are greeted by more servants given over to our bidding. Each of our party has at least a curtained alcove in which we will sleep after the formal reception, and adjoining bathrooms offer hot water, baths, and modern sonic showers. I follow Aenea and smile at her when she winks on her way out of the steamy room. I had no truly formal clothes at the temple hanging in air, nor any in the ship currently hiding on the third moon, for that matter, but Lomo Dondrub and some of the others roughly my size have fitted me out for tonight's honor. Black trousers and highly polished high black boots, a white silk shirt under a gold vest, with a red and black X-shaped wool overvest, tied together at the waist with a crimson silk sash. The formal evening cape is made of the finest warrior silk from the western reaches of Mustag Alta, and is mostly black, but with intricate border designs of red, gold, silver, and yellow. It is Lomo's second-best cape, and he made it quite clear that he would toss me from the highest platform if I stained, tore, or lost it. Lomo is a pleasant, easygoing man, almost unheard of in a lone flyer, I am told, but I think he was not kidding about this. A. Betic loaned me the requisite silver bracelets for the reception, these purchased by him on a whim in the beautiful markets of Siwangmu. Over my shoulder I place the feather and zygote wool red hood loaned to me by Jigme Norbu, who has waited his entire life in vain for an invitation to the Winter Palace. Around my neck is a jade and silver link Middle Kingdom formal talisman, courtesy of Master Carpenter and friend Changchi Kenchong, who told me this morning that he has been to 3 receptions at the palace and has been bored witless each time. Servants in gold silk come to our chambers to announce that it is time for us to congregate in the main reception hall next to the throne room. The outside corridors are filled with hundreds of guests moving along the tiled halls. Silk is rustling, jewelry rattles, and the air is filled with the clash of perfume and cologne and soap and leather. Ahead of us, I get a glimpse of the ancient Dorje Famo, the Thunderbolt Sow herself, being helped along by 2 of her 9 female priests, all of them in elegant saffron gowns. The sow wears no jewelry, but her white hair is tied and ribboned in elaborate mounds and beautiful braids. Aenea's gown is simple but breathtaking, a deep blue silk with a cobalt hood covering her otherwise bare shoulders, one Middle Kingdom talisman of silver and jade dropping to her bosom, and a silver comb pinned in her hair, holding a thin half-veil in place. Many of the women in view are veiled for modesty tonight, and I realize how cleverly this disguises my friend's appearance. She takes my arm, and we move in procession down the endless corridors, turning right and gliding up spiral escalators toward the Dalai Lama's levels. I lean close and whisper against her veiled ear. "Nervous?" I see the glint of her smile beneath the veil, and she squeezes my hand. Persisting, I whisper, "Kiddo, you sometimes see the future. I know you do. So, do we get out of this alive tonight?" I bend over as she leans close to whisper back, "Only a few things in anyone's future are set, Raul. Most things are as liquid as—" She gestures toward a swirling fountain that we pass and spiral above. "But I see no reason to worry, do you? There are thousands of guests here tonight. The Dalai Lama can greet us only a few in person. His guests, the Pax, whoever they will be, have no reason to think that we are here." I nod, but am not convinced. Suddenly, Labsang Samten, the Dalai Lama's brother, comes racketing down the ascending escalator in violation of all protocol. The monk is grinning and bubbling over with enthusiasm. He addresses our group, but hundreds on the rising staircase lean to listen in. "The guests from space are very important," he says enthusiastically. "I have been talking to our tutor, who is the assistant to the second-in-command of the Minister of Protocol. These are not just missionaries whom we greet tonight." "No," says the Lord Chamberlain Charles Chi-Kyap Kempo, resplendent in his many layers of red and gold silk. "No," grins Labsang Samten. "It is a cardinal of the Pax Church, and a very important cardinal, with several of his people." I feel my stomach churn and then drop into freefall. "Which cardinal?" says Aenea. Her voice seems calm and interested. We are approaching the top of the spiral staircase ride, and the sound of hundreds or thousands of softly murmuring guests fills the air. Labsang Samten straightens his formal monk's robe. "A Cardinal Mustafa," he says brightly. "Someone very close to the Pax Pope, I think. The Pax honors my brother by sending him as an ambassador." I feel Aenea's hand close on my arm, but I cannot see her expression clearly through the veil. "And several other important Pax guests," continues the monk, turning as we approach the reception level, "including some strange Pax women. Military types, I think." "Did you get their names?" asks Aenea. "One of them," says Lapsang, "General Nemes. She is very pale." The Dalai Lama's brother turns his wide, sincere smile on Aenea. "The Cardinal has asked to meet you specifically, Aenea. You and your escort, Endymion. The Protocol Minister was very surprised, but has arranged for a private reception for you with the Pax people and the Regent, and, of course, my brother, His Holiness, the Dalai Lama." Our ascent ends. The staircase slides into the marble floor. With Aenea on my arm, I step out into the noise and tightly controlled chaos of the main reception hall. And with that, I actually have to go because I mismanaged my time earlier. My apologies for that. I had hoped to get another chapter out, but I goofed. Whatever, we'll do more reading tomorrow, and then I think it's Thursday. 3 days from tomorrow. We're banging through it. I'm not totally convinced we'll be done reading through it by the end of the month. But we will see. It'll be close. We're making headway. Anyway, I gotta run. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. Sorry about the late start. As ever, stay safe, stay sane, be decent to each other, all the other good stuff. Thanks for tuning in, Nicole Berlino. I see you. I see you now. I don't actually get a list of people who are tuned in using my software, that I know of anyway. just get it. I just know based on if people comment or chat with me. Let me check. Can I see who it is? Will it tell me? I guess if I opened the stream, yeah. If I opened the stream on YouTube or Twitch or whatever, I would see it there. But I'm lazy and I don't do that. I minimize my network overhead as a result. Anyway, yeah. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. Things are moving to an interesting confrontation here with Cardinal Mustafa and of course one Radamanth Nemes, who have of course asked for them in person by name. So they are a known quantity. Murphy's Law is kicking in good and hard. So we'll see where that goes. We'll see how Aenea handles herself, how Raul handles himself, and how this particular confrontation will go tomorrow. Alrighty, with that, I'm going to